So the title of the song that they just sang was Bye Bye Babylon, and that is also the title of the message tonight. If you've been in church for any amount of time, you've probably heard that word before. Some of you might not know what it means. In reality, it was a place that we call today Iraq, but it's also a mindset, and that's something that we really dive into in the book of Revelation. And we're going to talk about that mindset tonight. How many of you know on Sundays we repeat after Pastor Jeff and we say, I am God-led, I am God-driven, right? So the spirit of Babylon, the Babylonian mindset is I am me-led, I am me-driven. And so we've got Jordan over here in Babylon. And he's just got a little paper that says me-led, me-driven. And over here we have Sarah in New Jerusalem, and it says God-led, God-driven. So just keep that in mind kind of as we go through the message tonight. So like I said, modernly we know Babylon as Iraq, but we're not talking about the literal place tonight. We're talking about the mindset. So in the book of Revelation, the word Babylon is used 6 times. And if you know me, you know that I geek out about the book of Revelation. It's like my favorite book in the Bible. It's so interesting. And so any chance that I get to talk about it, I take. And so that's part of the reason that we're doing this tonight. I think it's a very important message for us, especially in the world that we're living in today. So maybe sometimes as we read throughout the book of Revelation, if you're anything like me, I'm like, okay, but why? And so I try to figure out a way. Okay, but how? And I work on figuring out how, and we're going to kind of talk about the why and the how tonight. So the first place I want to take you guys is Old Testament Babylon, because Babylon is mentioned all throughout the Bible, but it all ties back in together. And so one of the defining moments in the Old Testament was the Babylonian Exile, and maybe some of you are familiar with that. The Israelites were enslaved, and the exile was one of the toughest experiences for them. In Jeremiah 50:33, it says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the people of Israel are oppressed, and the people of Judah with them. All who took them captive have held them fast, they refuse to let them go." But God. That's like one of my favorite statements to ever say. Like, okay, so maybe this happened, but God. He stands up in their defense. And in verse 38, it says, "A drought on her waters, they will dry up, for it is a land of idols, idols that will go mad with terror." And so idolatry was Babylon's major offense. They were creating their own religion, and they were leaving God completely out of it. And as we all know, God is a jealous God. He doesn't want us doing that. He wants our attention to be on him. I think even with my son, who's 4, the moment that I look away from him, he's like, "Excuse me, Mommy. I'm all that matters right now." And that's kind of how I relate it to God, where it's like the second that we look away, he's just like, "You're supposed to be focusing on me." But it's so easy for us to get wrapped up sometimes. And so this is also true of the Old Testament, Babylon's predecessor in the early pages of the Bible. How many of you have heard of the Tower of Babel? And that bred a lot of confusion, didn't it? And so that's what the Babylon mindset does, is it breeds confusion. Even if we don't feel like we're confused, it breeds confusion, and it diverts us from the path that we're supposed to be on, right? And so Babel had an alliance of people with one goal: to build a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens. You can read about that in Genesis 11. And so basically they were challenging God himself, which all of us sitting in this room probably know that was about the dumbest thing that you could possibly do, right? So what about New Testament Babylon? So John mentions for the first time in Revelation 14, but he develops the concept in Revelation 17. And in Revelation 17, we have a picture of a great prostitute, it says, who sits on many waters. And so the 17:1 and 2 says, Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." Which, that's a lot to take in, especially if you're not familiar with the book of Revelation. There's some weird verbiage there where you're probably like, okay, but what does that mean? So we're going to explain that a little bit. So these waters that they're talking about represent people, they represent multitudes. And so it represents nations and languages, things that we're accustomed to, things that we're not accustomed to, things in different cultures and things in our culture, right? And so all of these things support end-time Babylon. Now, the great prostitute is described as sitting on a scarlet beast, this is in verse 3, that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. These 7 heads represent 7 kingdoms throughout God's people being oppressed and persecuted throughout history. And the great prostitute is known as a religious power that is working together with secular powers. And how many of you see that today? Religious powers working along with secular powers. The first thing that comes to my head when I think about that is the Pope. Right? We see that so much today that people that are supposed to be of God have completely turned away from God under the guise of religion and under the guise of peace and of love and all of these things, but really it's the exact opposite, because is it love if you're leading people to hell? Of course not. So how about the future fall of Babylon? I know that this is a lot of history and a lot of facts, and even on the way here, I told my mom, I was like, I'm such a nerd, and I like all of like the little details, and hopefully people don't get bored, but I'm going somewhere, I promise. I'm taking you somewhere. So Revelation 18 paints another picture of Babylon's fall, okay? So it's a picture of the destruction of the city. And at this point, we've talked about the reasons for her fall, right? We talked about what the great prostitute was doing, what was happening. Looking at the sins of Babylon help us identify areas where she's with us today. And so it says, with a mighty voice, the angel shouted, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a home for demons and a haunt for every evil spirit, a haunt for every unclean and detestable bird. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries." So this gives us 3 reasons for the fall of Babylon, okay? The first is all the nations have drunk the adulterous wine. The second is the kings of earth have committed adultery with Babylon. And the third is the merchants of the earth grew rich through the luxuries of Babylon. So there's a 3-fold condemnation that's happening here. It's political, it's religious, and it's financial. And how much of that do you see today? A ridiculous amount, right? So the financial level is one that all of us are confronted with on a daily basis. We can't escape financial dealings today. There's just no possible way to do that. And we all kind of end up as easy targets because of that, which is hard to kind of wrap your head around, but we don't really have a choice. But interestingly enough, Revelation 18 emphasizes finances. And so this is obviously something that we really need to be paying attention to and listening for. So Babylon uses all of these aspects to attract and gain followers, okay? The same things that we're seeing now. They just want to lead the nations of the earth astray. And so the deception's great. We can say that end-time Babylon is going to be a global alliance, right? And it's going to have support of political, religious, and financial powers of today's world. They're going to join together to achieve all kinds of material gain and profit. And in their dealings, they're going to be breaking all of the commandments of God, which we're already seeing. So the mindset of Babylon tends to convince us that nothing bad is going to happen to us. Like maybe you see the downfall of somebody else and you're like, yeah, but they did this, so they kind of deserved it. But that's not going to happen to me. Like, I'm just kind of like dipping my toe into it. I'm not like doing a swan dive into it, right? But what's the difference? We tend to believe that living in our sin is okay because it's not as bad as that person's sin. Or ignoring the call of God in our lives is okay because we're pretty successful with what we're doing right now. Maybe we do convince ourselves that we love God, but the Bible straightforward tells us that if we love him, we're going to keep his commandments. And if we're not doing that, then we really don't love him, do we? Period. End of point, right? So God's people of the Old Testament received a call to exit Babylon. And you can read about that in Ezra 1 through 4, if you want to check that out. But only a small number of people came out. The majority had already begun to enjoy it there. My little friend. You want to get Mimi, buddy? And they accepted the Babylonian mentality, and they decided to stay there. And a lot of people are also doing that today. But Revelation 18:4 sends out a message to the end-time people of God to exit Babylon. And it says, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sin, so that you will not receive any of her plagues." We're called not to accept the Babylonian lifestyle, aren't we? That's pretty clear here. This mentality takes advantage of the weak. It takes advantage of the poor. It takes advantage of the powerless. And it just goes for unfair gain and profit for self, okay? So do we want to be on Babylon's side or do we want to be on God's side? That's really the nitty-gritty of this entire message. Can we survive without any treasures of the earth? Probably not, right? Like, we need to have money to be able to feed our families. We need to have money to be able to put a roof over our families' heads. We need to be able to have access to some sort of technology to talk to loved ones. You know, like my sister lives in Florida. If I had no technology, I'd have to try to train a carrier pigeon to get a hold of her. And that sounds pretty impossible, right? So there are some things that we have to partake in. We don't have a choice. But the Bible doesn't call us not to live on the earth. It just calls us not to be a part of the world, right? And so we need to have balance in our activities. We have to earn our living. We don't have a choice. But we cannot allow this to force us to lose sight of God. And so God calls us clearly, come out of her. He calls us to be with him instead. And Jesus was very, very radical in his statements. So I'm going to be very, very radical in mine tonight. He said, "Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And that's Luke 12, if you want to write that down. So Babylon offers her own way of life and salvation through human achievements. And that's very easy for us to get wrapped up in. Sometimes we just really want the approval of other people. It's just human nature. Even our families, our friends, strangers that we pass on the street, we're like, "Do you want to know what I did today that was just so fantastic?" Like, sometimes we praise ourselves a little bit too much, right? But what's our other option? So the opposite of the city of Babylon in the book of Revelation is God's city, the New Jerusalem. And that's Revelation 21 and 22. So this is the city that God prepares for the faithful ones. How many of you want to be a part of New Jerusalem? Can we all agree that we want to be a part of New Jerusalem and not Babylon? So the catch here is, in Babylon, you have to pay. You have to pay with your salvation. You have to pay in every way. You have to give everything to be a part of Babylon, but we're invited to New Jerusalem for free. God doesn't ask anything but for us to follow him, right? To take up our cross, deny the world, deny our sins. And in John 10:10, he says, "I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." And that is a promise. That's not, well, maybe if you do this, then I'll give you a full life. No, it's I have come so that they may have a full life. He came, he already did what he's supposed to do. The rest is up to us. Grace invites us to be free, and truth sets us free. So a lot of times in our lives, we hear that we have to choose this or this, but these two things work together. They only come together. You can't have grace without truth, and you can't have truth without grace. It's not an either or. They complement each other very, very well. However, knowing that culture has an agenda to pull you away from your best life, you might be tempted to pull yourself out of culture altogether. Like sometimes there are some things going on and you're like, if I could just build a barricade or like around myself and my family or even around my church and not let the evil in, that would be fantastic, but we're not called to do that, right? We're supposed to be on the front lines. We're supposed to be right in the middle of everything that's going on, fighting against who Jesus calls the evil one, right? We're not supposed to be cowering in the shadows because we're the only ones that can overcome that. So the devil has one lie that spawns all of the other lies, and that is what he said for the very first time when he spoke in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. He's always going to elevate humans above God. And so the devil tries to tell us, I am all about you, and God is all about himself. When in reality, it's the exact opposite, isn't it? God is all about us. The devil doesn't care about us. He wants to take us down. He's jealous that, we have the opportunity for salvation, and he knows where his destination is. And so in John 17, right before Jesus went to the cross, I'm sure with Easter just passing, we all know this prayer. I'm not asking you to take them out of the world. This is New Living Translation. But to keep them safe from the evil one. They do not belong to this world any more than I do. And can you just sit in that for a moment? Because we tend to be like, okay, but I'm a human. It's harder for me, but Jesus is explicitly saying they don't belong in this world any more than I do. Because now what I'm going to do for them is going to elevate them to where I am and give them the opportunity to be where I am. But that does come with a cost. So we tend to get that fort mentality I talked about. We want to build a barricade. But we have to realize that if we build that barricade, there are going to be people that are not meant to be here, to be stuck in these ways that are going to be stuck there because we weren't brave enough to go out and tell them about Jesus, right? And so if you follow a way other than God's way, it's going to produce confusion in your life. You're going to find yourself living in chaos. Look at the world around you right now. Everything is chaos. Nothing is exempt. Everything is chaos. We have more genders than any of us can count or comprehend. We've got all kinds of things that none of us have ever seen before, things that just baffle us. Everything is chaos, even everything that we used to think was set in stone. Like we just thought it was this because this is how it was created, right? And now it's all of this, and we're like, how did that happen? Babylon. And so Babylon's motto is, I am, and there is none beside me. I'll repeat that one more time. I am, and there is none beside me. This is the biggest trick of the devil right here. If he can get you self-focused, if he can make you think that you matter more than anything else in the entire world, then he's got you right where he wants you. He can eventually get you, like Adam and Eve, to think that you're smarter than God, that God's somehow holding out on you because you don't have this information or you don't have this ability. But in reality, that's a lot of pressure. If we had all the abilities of God, we would crumble. He's not holding anything back from us. He's protecting us. And so every sin, every ungodly behavior can be summed up in one idea: elevate yourself. Just think of the 10 Commandments. Every single commandment is something that he's telling us not to do to elevate ourselves. If we're going to steal from somebody, we're going to gain from them and elevate ourselves. If we're going to go as far as murdering somebody, right, we're ending their life to elevate ours. Every single thing that we do in sin is to elevate ourselves. And this expresses itself in 3 different ways. And the first way is self-adoration. Like, you see it all the time, and this is not against anybody, but like, okay, let me post all of these selfies and let people see how cute I look. Let me go to the gym and take 15 pictures at the gym and 10 videos and post all of them so everybody can see how good I look. Like, that's why so many women today, fall into Botox and fillers and all of these things, because it's like, okay, I want people to notice me. I want to elevate myself to look better than the people around me so that I get the adoration for that, right? The second is self-building. I can do this without God. I'll let him know when I need him. He can have me on Sundays, but Monday through Saturday, I got it. I can handle this on my own, right? And sometimes we don't even realize when we're falling into that, but we've already fallen way too far to get out of that, and things start to fall apart. That's why church attendance is pretty low when things are calm. And then a tragedy happens and everybody's crowded at the doors trying to get inside because, oh God, I need you. But you needed him all along. Maybe if we'd all been here on our faces, that wouldn't have happened, right? And so most people don't truly believe that they need God until everything falls apart. And the next one is self-indulging. So in other words, if it feels good, I'm going to do it. Right? God's not going to ask me not to do something that feels good. And that can be as silly as, you go to Dunkin' Donuts and you pick up a dozen donuts and they're all your favorite. And you're like, how am I going to pick one? I have to eat all of them, right? And one day you eat this whole box of donuts. That's self-indulging. Our body is still a temple that we're supposed to take care of, right? But sometimes those donuts just look so good. My son would eat 5 boxes of those donuts in a day if I would let him. But because I love him, I don't, right? So in order to elevate yourself, there's something else that has to take place at the same time, and this is where it kind of starts to feel like a knife in your gut, right? And that's, you have to lower God to elevate yourself. And maybe we don't even realize that we're doing it because we do believe that we love him. But when you love somebody, you don't view them as lower. When you love somebody, sometimes you even see them as, not with God, but sometimes you see them as better than they actually are. Like, when you love somebody, you naturally elevate them. Don't we do that? So you have to make him less than he is. You have to put him below your ideas, below your passions, your pleasures. You have to lower him. And that's exactly what culture does. There is no other religion on the face of the planet that people lower every single chance that they get. There's no type of person outside of a Christian that people lower every single chance that they get. So, only God can restore us. And that's just what I'm here to remind you of tonight, that he's the only one that can take you and make you better than you were before. And that's not about, well, I want to be better than this person. That's just about, I just want to be who God needs me to be. When you try to elevate yourself, you're going to fall hard. I don't know if any of you have ever seen those funny compilation YouTube videos of people just hurting themselves in the dumbest ways. There are people that, go down ramps on bicycles, and I can't pick on them. I can't even ride a bike, guys. I'm admitting that to you all right now. So there are these people that go down these huge ramps on their bike and think that they're just going to keep going, and they just face plant into the concrete. And we laugh at it. Sometimes it's really humorous, but if we were in that situation, it wouldn't be quite as funny, would it? Going to the hospital with your bones and your face crushed, it would suck. But that's what we do when we elevate ourselves, because we don't know how to stand up there. We always fall. And you don't know if you're ever going to recover from that. If we put God first, we don't have to worry about that because he's the one that elevates us. He's the one that gives us the opportunities that we're supposed to have, the ones that are going to further us and the ones that are going to be a blessing to us. It's not something that we create for ourselves. It's something that he does on our behalf. And so we've all had idols. We've all had idols. I remember as a teenage girl, my walls were covered to the point where you couldn't even see my walls with pictures of the Jonas Brothers, okay? I mean, you couldn't see my walls, could you guys? They were covered. I even had posters on my ceiling. Okay? Covered. That was an idol, right? I no longer have any posters on my walls. But that's just an example. For my son, like, dinosaurs are the most important thing in his life. Dinosaurs are this 4-year-old's idol. And I'm trying to teach him out of that, but in time, that'll come. But we all have something. It could be our kids. It could be our spouses. It could be food. It could be that TV show that we just have to sit down and binge over and over and over again. I know I've never watched Grey's Anatomy, but I know it's been going on for like ever. They just keep making more episodes, and there are people that are so religious about watching them. Idols could be anything. And God is inviting us to come to the altar tonight and leave those here, okay? There's a song that's going to play in a couple of minutes, and when that starts, I want you to feel free to come up and just take a quiet moment with God, because that's what he's asking us for tonight. If anything gets taken away from this message, I just want you to remember that God wants to be the center. He doesn't want us to be a part of Babylon, because in Babylon comes weeping. Like that song said that the girls sang, "Daughters of Zion, weep no more. Pack your bags, you're coming home." Babylon is a place full of heartbreak. Babylon is a place that brings us to addiction. Babylon is a place that brings us to a feeling of worthlessness. Babylon is a place where it feels like we can't give enough. You know, if you've ever wanted the approval of somebody so bad, but it felt like no matter what you did, you couldn't get it. That's exactly what it feels like when you're living in Babylon. And when you're in New Jerusalem, you know, God promises us fullness of life. He promises us peace, and he promises us joy. And that's not saying that while we're here on earth, we're never going to have any trials, because we certainly will. But the Bible even tells us today, I don't know how many of you have the Bible app, but today the verse of the day was, you know, to find joy in the trials, because they really do polish us. They really do create us to be the person that God wants us to be, and he can really, really work through us in those moments. And it can make us more empathetic with one another, right? It can make us understand each other better, have a little bit more patience with each other, because as humans, our patience tends to run pretty thin. Maybe especially with some people. Maybe there's somebody that pops in your head as soon as I say that. But we're called to love them anyway, right? And when we are in communion with God, he makes it a lot easier. But before that song plays, I don't want to leave here tonight without giving you the opportunity to do the most important thing that you're ever going to do in your entire life, and that is to just get into a relationship with Jesus on a very real level. And maybe there's a strong pull inside of you because it's time. Maybe it's something that you think, you know, maybe I did it before, but I feel like I didn't actually mean it, or I didn't actually walk through it. And I know that it's time, because we don't know how much time we're going to have. And I would hate to think that I didn't stand up here and give the offer and somebody were to walk out the door and something were to happen. And I've lost too many friends, even in the last year, that we never would have expected to lose. And if I had just had a moment with them to give them the offer, I wish that I could have had it. And so I love all of you in this room, even if I don't know your name, and I want you to have that opportunity. Even if you've taken it before and you feel like you need to take it again, that's okay. We all know that we're not very good at managing our own lives, even if we're very type A and we feel like we're going to do it better than anybody else. We're not going to do it better than God can. And so if that's you, if you're ready to do that, I want you to go ahead and just say the following prayer out loud. And if everybody else would just repeat after me too, so that nobody feels uncomfortable or embarrassed, or maybe it's just one person that actually needs to pray the prayer and it's stopping them to think that it's just one person, I would really appreciate it, because when you do this, Jesus is going to wash you clean. You're going to be taken out of Babylon. You're not going to have to suffer. You're not going to have to live with the pain and the regret and the endless longing for some sort of approval, because you've got everything that you need at New Jerusalem. And so when you accept salvation, you are literally like boarding a plane out of Babylon straight into New Jerusalem, and that's that. So he's going to fill you with joy and peace, and he's going to fill you with purpose. And so if everybody would just bow their heads and close their eyes, and let's say bye-bye to Babylon. So Jesus, I've been living without you, and I don't want to do that anymore. I've done a lot of things wrong, and I need your forgiveness. I accept your love and grace for me and ask that you would be my Lord. Thank you for making me new. Thank you for washing away my past. I hand my life over to you, and I ask that you'd help me walk out your plan for my life. Now, this song is going to play even if you don't feel like coming up to the altar, but I hope that everybody will leave something here tonight.